So thank you for coming. Thank you for coming along today. And while people are still joining us, do take the time to introduce yourselves in the chat and maybe tell us a little bit about your thoughts on where you're at in your organisation with regard to the challenges of climate change. Just a bit of housekeeping. We've got closed captions enabled today, but you can turn them off at the bottom of the screen. As you've just heard, we're recording the webinar. And if you've got any confidential, sensitive issues that you'd maybe like to discuss with any of our speakers and would rather not do that in this session, you can get in touch afterwards with us. We'll be sending out all the slides to you afterwards in a follow-up email. But as I say, do put any questions you've got in the chat and we will have time to look at these at the end. We're running this webinar for the SCVO Trustee Network as there's a growing recognition of the importance of trustees taking account of climate change and other environmental factors in their decision making. So I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague, Chiara Fingland, and she's SCVO's Climate Development Officer, who heads up our work on growing climate confidence. So I'm just going to hand over to Chiara now, and she will introduce our other speakers for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and lovely to see all those that have joined on the webinar today. I'm absolutely delighted and very excited to be joined by two guest speakers today as well to accompany me as we kind of talk about how we can fall in love with the future and our journey to climate confidence. So we are joined by Emma Yule, who is a climate resilience manager at Verture, but also wears several board or trustee hats, including the 2050 Climate Group. She's a director of the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network and also a trustee of the Scottish Communities Alliance. So we're delighted to hear from Emma today. And we also have Christopher Lavelle on the call, who's a project manager or senior project manager at Glasgow University and is also a chair of Glasgow Eco Trust. So both join us today to hopefully share some peer insights as trustee or board members. But without any further ado, I'm just gonna share my screen. So if you just bear with me. So hopefully you can all see that. Tracy will keep me right if not.
Yeah, that looks good.
Perfect. So within today's webinar, we're going to kind of do 5 key things. Firstly, a little bit of scene setting, which I'll kind of guide us through. And then it's very much kind of over to have a bit of a conversation with Emma and also Chris to share their insights as a kind of fellow peer, trustee or board director. There'll be also an allotted time for questions and answers. So please kind of feel free to pop those in the chat as we go along, or feel free to kind of raise your hand when we get to the Q&A function, and we look forward to hopefully having a good discussion based on the insights shared during the session. And then in the spirit of the sort of imagining part of the session, we'll finish up with some visioning from the speakers and a bit of a wrap up as well. But first of all, kind of setting the scene, or as I've called it, a little bit of a kind of climate reality check. So I'm a kind of visual person, so I think, you know, a picture says 1,000 words quite often. And in this image, which is on the screen here, which is the global warming stripes and the biodiversity stripes, I think it kind of illustrates the polycrisis that we currently face with both rising temperatures, but also its kind of correlation and how it negatively is affecting biodiversity as well. So there's lots of kind of challenges at play in terms of understanding what the situation is that we're in. There's also that growing recognition that, you know, there's a number of recent projects and research which shows that there's a majority of people who do want the government to be doing more to address climate change. So recently, like very recently, there's been the kind of rise of the 89% project, which talks about that kind of silent majority. So actually creating space and raising awareness that actually the majority of people do think this is an issue that needs addressed. But also the Scottish Government's recent Scottish Climate Survey, with the main findings showcasing that almost 3/4 of respondents felt that climate change is an immediate or urgent problem. So, you know, we can begin to see that this is something that we need to deal with, and people are kind of gaining momentum in terms of understanding that it's something that they kind of need to get their heads around. However, we also know that from some findings from the third sector tracker, which basically takes a kind of research and sample set across the sector. We had a question in last spring around resilience, and what came back through the feedback was that 54% of voluntary organisations expect climate change to have a small or no impact on their organisation. So from this, it kind of really highlights that kind of gap in terms of ambition and reality in terms of, okay, well, how does it actually affect me and my organization? Like, what does that all mean? And how do I connect it to the understanding that this is a big issue that needs dealt with, but actually trying to make it relevant and tangible to you and your organization? However, in saying that, 80% of those who did believe it would have an impact also recognised the importance for the organisations to be building resilience. And this is something that we're also going to be kind of touching on in today's session as well. It also highlighted that there was need for help with funding, advice and guidance, and also staff and training. And that's certainly something that we hope, certainly the advice and guidance and training side of it, to be signposted to through the Growing Climate Confidence work. And, why does it matter? What are the climate change impacts that we might all be facing or we will be facing? So this resource from Adaptation Scotland provides that really useful kind of prompt to begin to consider what the consequences and implications might be. So here on the screen are 15 of those that they've kind of pulled out. And I think it's interesting maybe just to take a moment to have a look through those on the screen and just see, is there any that resonate with you and with your experience in terms of the past or a current or indeed future challenge. So I think with, for example, the recent storms that we've had, we've seen quite a few of these consequences really coming to be quite live, whether that's to do with like services around health and well-being in our people, or disruption with our infrastructure and network connectivity, and really trying to relay that back to, how might that be impacting kind of your organization or needing to think about that strategically and operationally as a trustee. So yeah, how does it relate to your role as a trustee or director? So this is where it's quite helpful to kind of go back to the Scottish Governance Code. And within that, there's relevant different themes. But in particular, I just wanted to pull out one around the board behaviour aspect, where in terms of best practice, it recommends about making sure that your organisation takes account of climate change and other environmental factors in its decision making. And I think within that as well, it's kind of important to recognize the wider kind of co-benefits to taking some of this action as well. So rather than just thinking about kind of it as a nice bolt-on or an add-on, actually thinking, okay, well, if I'm able to take climate action, these are actually some of the other things that I'm able to achieve. Or equally, by doing this action, I might be able to achieve other things. And I think the kind of cartoon image to the right, which some of you may be familiar with, is always kind of quite a useful one in terms of saying, even if it was a big hoax, are we just creating a better world for nothing when we could be creating more energy independence or cleaner air and water, healthier children and places for our young people to grow up in? And again, I think some of the speakers will touch on that a little bit later on today. So there's a kind of shift as well in terms of reframing the narrative. And I appreciate the last few slides have been focused on the challenge and the situation. However, I think we also need to recognise the need to create space for kind of imagining that future and actually asking that question around what does good look like, but really kind of beginning to visualise what we would like to see. So again, the speakers are going to reflect on some of that, but maybe that's something to kind of have in the back of your mind as well in terms of actually being and taking the time to think about what does good look like. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to highlight some of the work that we are doing through the Growing Climate Confidence project. So for those that aren't familiar with it, it's really about supporting Scotland's third sector towards net zero. I like to add and beyond because it's not just net zero. But really this is about creating a space that I've just mentioned there around trying to interrogate what good looks like, but also bringing people along the journey and taking basically what is an incredibly overwhelming topic and just trying to understand, what is its relevance to your organization and how might you be able to build a plan around that on your net journey to net zero. We've got a wide range of partners that are involved, as you can see here on the screen. I'll not read them all out, but you can see it's a kind of strong partnership. So we're trying to kind of reach right across the voluntary and social enterprise sector, and bringing forth and drawing out different key skills of those partners in order to try and expand the reach of the project, but also the support that we can give you and your organisations. And we're funded by a series of funders between the Cora Foundation, the National Lottery, the Robertson Trust, SSE, and William Grant Foundation. But also just a little small call to action, because again, it's like, oh, where do I even start with all of this? But through the Growing Climate Confidence project, we've developed a kind of checkup tool. So it's a bit of a dynamic survey that can give you an organizational snapshot. So if you're familiar, like in terms of being on the trustees network with the good governance checkup, it's a similar thing, but from a sort of climate perspective. And it takes you through kind of 5 thematic areas, asking you different questions, and then kind of basically spits out a bit of a score. And I always say to take this with a pinch of salt because it's really about a prompt for discussion, and just basically giving you little nudges about what you can do next. So off the back of completing the checkup, as I say, you get a score to kind of work out where you're doing well, where there's maybe areas for improvement, but also you can come to us at any point and just kind of ask us to chat it through. But also you'll get emails, little nudges based on your results, which are tailored tips to kind of keep you going on that journey. And the key thing being really is it forms a plan that works for you. So in terms of engaging and learning, things about reducing your emissions, but also opportunities for campaigning and social justice, and also thinking about adapting. So the scorecard that I just mentioned in the previous slide really thinks about your organisation and how it can reduce its carbon emissions. But we've also got some training, and also Emma's going to talk about it shortly in terms of what you can do to adapt and why we need to adapt as well. So I think, in essence, the Green Climate Conference is here to support you as well. So please do reach out at any time if there's anything today that you'd like to discuss further. And we need to be doing things around cutting our emissions, so the climate mitigation, but also looking to kind of adapt our practice, so reducing the risks and impacts of climate change. So I think that brings me and the scene setting to a close. And I will now pass over to Emma to take us through the next section.
Thank you. So I was going to kick off with a bit more on climate adaptation that Chiara introduced, which is mainly where I work in the kind of climate adaptation research space. And then we'll have some advice and insights about how we can try and embed that into boards and decision making. So what is climate adaptation? Got the same diagram again, although I think a mirror image, so we're keeping you on your toes today. So mitigation, as we've talked about, actions that reduce emissions that contribute to climate change in the first place. So things like renewable energy, active travel, renewable energies. Whereas when we talk about adaptation, it's around actions that can help us prepare and reduce the risks from the impacts of climate change. So that might be things like flood protections, heat management plans, considering things like business continuity. So it's all about trying to understand the risks that we face today from climate change, and then the actions that we might want to take to prepare for future projected change. And we tend to say that we're trying to get from an unadapted state to an adapting state. So it's this kind of continual process of learning from potentially floods that we've suffered, or heat waves, and trying to kind of build adaptation and resilience over time. And can we go to the next slide, please, Chiara? So why does this matter? Why do we need to do this? So as we know, our climate has already changed, and our climate in Scotland has already changed today as well. So we're seeing more frequent, more intense floods, heat waves, and storms, for example. And we're seeing this impacting public health, our infrastructures, maybe also within our own organisations as well. And when we look, we've got another climate stripe diagram here on the right-hand side that shows the global temperature change for each year, and we see 2020 marked there. And we can see that in any future scenario, whether there's very high emissions or very low emissions, the climate looks much warmer than anything we've lived through in the past. Even if you look at that bottom line, where there's a very low emission scenario, we're still in that different climate and that warmer climate and having to deal with the impacts, the floods, heat waves that brings. So adaptation is really important because we're going to be suffering the impacts of this now and over the next few decades, even if we meet all our mitigation targets. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there's two terms that come up in this conversation, adaptation and resilience. And I think in different sectors, they're kind of defined in different ways. But I think usually we talk about adaptation as the actions that we can take to prepare for the impacts of climate change. And resilience is kind of the end goal that we want to see, where resilience is our ability to cope with a variety of different futures or scenarios, maybe not just climate related as well. So when we think about resilience, it tends to be longer thinking, maybe more transformative change. So thinking about this kind of holistically, so that could be, for example, communities becoming self-sufficient, they're able to deal with the impacts of climate change, but also maybe looking at power shifts, kind of system changes, who has decision-making power in this, and all that kind of tied together. So I think the resilience is kind of understanding the climate risk, but also looking at the whole systemic change that would need to happen to build that resilience and reduce vulnerability. Next slide, please. Thank you. And I thought I'd put in this slide on climate risk because I think when we talk about climate risk and adaptation, we usually talk a lot about the hazard. So whether that's the heavy rainfall events that we've been seeing that have been leading to floods or heat waves or storms, but actually climate risk is a function not only of the hazard, but who is exposed to that hazard and the vulnerability related to that as well. So exposure might be, for example, if we live or work in a floodplain, or it might be overheating risk related to outdoor work. And then vulnerability might be related to underlying health conditions, for example, which could be linked to age or linked to socioeconomic reasons such as low income. If there's not money available to make changes to drainage or flood protections on a house, for example. So I think this is a good way of trying to unpick what climate risk means for our organisation and see if we have colleagues or communities or individuals that we work with who could be exposed or more vulnerable to these events. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when I thought about how we can embed climate change into both kind of strategic, operational development, I thought these kind of three pillars came up for me. And I think the first one is around how we can make connections between climate impacts and key policy areas or goals that your organisation has. So that could be looking at particular climate impacts and how that might impact your organisation directly, but also things like the connections to health, education. If your organisation focuses on that, how might that be impacted by climate change? And we'll go into that in a bit more detail in the next slides. And then secondly, understanding how climate change might impact your stakeholders and colleagues. So that might be kind of direct impacts of these climate hazards. It could be eco-anxiety or just wanting to understand a bit more about the actions that colleagues or stakeholders could take. And then lastly, I'll talk a bit more about how we can keep climate change on the agenda and some of the things that I've seen done in board meetings to try and make that happen. Next slide, please, Chiara. So I'll not go into this in too much depth, but it'll be there to have a read at after. But this was just some of the key links, I think, between climate, particularly climate adaptation, and some operational priorities that your organisation might have. So things like if we think about healthcare, if we have goals related to healthcare, aging population, for example, how might things like floods and heat waves impact on that? Are hospitals or healthcare centres at risk of overheating or flooding? What might that mean within that sector? Similar for education as well. What happens if schools, colleges or universities are at risk of flooding and overheating? But also on the other side of that, we need to be developing green skills as well to look at these climate solutions and understand impacts. Also, I've got reducing poverty and inequality, which is actually one of the principles of successful adaptation action, which is all about reducing vulnerability. And there's been lots of studies looking at the links between people living in poverty and that link to higher vulnerability as well. So even flood zones as well and floodplains being more associated to low income housing. So if that's on your one of your organizational goals or the individuals or communities that you work with, then making these links explicit can help to try and embed climate and also make sure that we're kind of understanding what might happen as these floods and heat waves progress to make sure that we can try and reduce vulnerability. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on keeping climate change on the agenda, so in our board meetings at 2050 Climate Group, we tend to have a climate moment each board meeting, and that can be something, maybe a way that climate change has impacted something that we've done, whether that is an event, or it could be a kind of negative or positive action. We try and keep it positive and optimistic, something that we've managed to work on since our last meeting. And as we know, climate change is very much in the now, but I think when we have that space to think maybe longer term or out of the box at some meetings, maybe strategy days, for example, we can try and think about how to embed this more into day-to-day practice. I think as well, we can sometimes forget the huge variety of ways that we can take climate action and how that can be embedded. So also thinking about, I think, the strengths that your organisation has. So there's roles in, the arts, the creative side around how we communicate climate change and how we kind of share and process an event that maybe has happened as well. Right through to the physical science and the engineering side of the problem as well. So I think there's a role for this for everybody. So I think it's around matching your organizational expertise as well to where you can make impact. And lastly, I've put collaborating with other organizations and networks that are taking climate action, because I think our actions are always stronger when we can collaborate together. So I've listed a few there. I'm happy to chat more about that in the Q&A. And my final slide is just some top tips, so kind of an overview of this. So I think for adaptation, my recommendation would be to try and make explicit links between climate impact and your organizational values, and also thinking about how climate change may impact your organizational goals. So thinking about heat waves, floods, increased storms, how that might impact the goals you're trying to achieve, but also how that might impact your stakeholders and the colleagues within your organization as well. So I think opening up that conversation with as many people as you can is a really good start. And lastly, I've just put there again to try and allocate that time for kind of out the box, longer term thinking and strategy, and consider who you could collaborate with, and maybe think about keeping that as a standard item, either a climate moment, even a weather moment, or some kind of climate connection, so that it's there and you can continue to look back. And I think it becomes easier over time to see the connections between climate change and your organizational goals. I think that's what I've found as well in the spaces that I'm at. It becomes really clear the more you discuss it, where those connections are. Thank you. I'll pass back over to you, Chiara.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. And a great kind of like setting out of what adaptation is and what climate risk is, but also some real kind of useful actions in there in terms of how you can have those conversations as a kind of board or trustee, and having an item on a standing agenda. Like a climate moment or climate connection is a great idea. So I'll definitely be taking that one on board. I'm now going to pass over to Chris, who's going to kind of continue in the vein of talking around people in collaboration. So I think without any thing further, I'll just invite Chris to come on.
Good afternoon, everybody. So thanks to SCBO for the invitation, and hello everybody. I'm Chris Lavelle. I'm the chair of Glasgow Eco Trust and a senior project manager at the University of Glasgow. So today, I want to talk to you about how we build climate confidence through people, through collaboration, and through learning, because like the title of our talk, falling in love with the future isn't just a feeling, it is a practice. And at Glasgow Eco Trust, it's one that we live every day, to be cheesy. So, next slide. Let's get personal. So for me, I'm going to be talking about how we learn from our peers, our partners, and our people. And the first person, obviously, that you are meeting from the Eco Trust is myself. So who am I and what am I about? So for me, well, why did I get involved? Well, I want to simply because climate action starts with who we are and what we care about. And in my work and in my leadership, I try to balance three things really, which is around people, process, and technology. So what do I mean by that? Well, for the people element, it's about relationships, it's about building trust, and it's about building community as that individual. The process part is about how we make decisions. It's how we stand behind our decisions and how do we give ourselves effectively an audit trail and insight and to make sure that we are making the best decision with the information available to us. And then ultimately that would be leveraged with technology. So effectively using tools that help us to stay focused and stay accountable. So at the Eco Trust, these three elements come together in how we run our projects, how we engage as a board, how we support our staff, and how we support our wider community. And that basically gives us the kind of confidence to go from day to day and move forward in our next steps, which leads us to our next slide. So, people power in practice. So for me, one thing that I've seen quite clearly at our organisation is that people make the culture. It's through those individuals, as I've said there, that bring passion, energy, and different skills to organisations. So through small actions, whether that's people giving you their time, speaking up at meetings, running local events, whether it's local cleanups, that helps shift how people see themselves, and it also helps shift the organisations that they're part of. So whether people come and engage with the trust and then take that into their workplace is a great thing to see. And over time, those relationships and those kind of small engagements and interactions actually help to build confidence within individuals talking about climate change and talking about local environmental issues. And it helps build momentum that people can actually see changes happening. So even at an individual level, we've had people coming from various kind of walks of life, engineers. We are based in next to BAE Systems, just for a bit of kind of local context. Where folk have come in, they've supported us, and then they've taken things into their organisations and tried to do relevant schemes and projects based on some of the information that they've learned or people that they've worked with. So to reflect on the Eco Trust on that, we kind of ground ourselves in a few key values for people to take away, which is that we do everything in collaboration. So we do things with our community and not to our community. We like to try to be as transparent as possible. So I would almost use a phrase that we're aggressively transparent, and that allows us to build trust. People don't have any sort of kind of ideas or notions that we've got any sort of hidden agenda or funders, or that we come at things from a different angle. That we are who we say we are. We do what we say and we say what we do. And kind of underpinning that actually is I've got a couple of kind of bullet points at the bottom is risk management and people management. And for me, that's effectively being kind of proactive to ensure that we can survive as an organisation and that we plan well, and we're not afraid to try to actually look at some of our kind of more challenging situations. And we need to think about how we care and support our people, because without those individuals, we don't work. And I'm going to plug this. You can see there on the slide, Monday.com. That's not to be a salesman for another American corporation, but it's just effectively a project management tool that we have migrated to over the last year, that allows us to kind of keep on top of our actions and stay action orientated and not actually get bogged down with chasing paper and Excel spreadsheets. And it's just a really functional and useful tool that they help support us. So next slide. So this is about those individuals when we come together as a board. So me being the kind of chair of the board and the other people on the board, ultimately we play a role in helping to build that culture and set that tone. So we don't just oversee and act as administrators, we are effectively stewards of the Eco Trust and kind of ensure that when people look at us, they kind of see an example. So we lead with action, not just the kind of agenda items. And at the Trust as well, we done away with traditional roles as such, with the exception of chair, just because I effectively need to sign the checks. But ultimately, when it comes to our treasury, secretary, all these types of things, we made a combined decision that we would be action orientated. So we ask what the organisation needs and what the staff need and who's best placed to do it. And taking that approach actually gives us a flexibility to adapt to different challenges. It also allows people to focus on their particular areas of expertise, where they can actually apply the energy that they have from their personal, professional life into that. So we're quite lucky that we've got quite a few folk who are based in finance. So we've got an audit manager, someone who works in funding. We did have a chartered accountant. We've got another person who looks at behavioural change. And that allows us actually to bring those different skill sets. And with their personal dedication to sustainability and our professional element, it allows us actually to then look at these kind of domains in a sustainability focused kind of decision-making process. Supports our participation, obviously, because people are coming at it with their expertise. We don't feel that they are speaking about things that they don't really know about. And having those skill sets actually allows us to be accountable for what we do. So it provides our funders and other organisations or it provides us anyway with accountability. So as an organisation, we can actually move forward with confidence and allow us to build partnerships, which takes us to our next slide. So who are our partners and what are they about, and how does that enable place-based change? So I've kind of taken this from the individuals. I've taken it how we've kind of built that into the trust, and then how do we then extend that out? So as I've kind of said, is that we don't work in isolation. We are rooted in the west of Glasgow. In the northwest of Glasgow, that'd be the G13, G14 postcodes. And our partnerships actually make a lot of our work possible. So you can see quite a few of the organisations that I've pinpointed there. So just to kind of speak to them. So we've got the climate action forums. So we organise various forums in a community centre, the Heart of Scotstoun Community Centre, which is a building that we had built, and then we created the Heart of Scotstoun Community Group, which we then spun out, so they now run independently. But we still host those forums, and that's where we can actually help to cut through a lot of, I guess, public misinformation and disinformation that people kind of are unsure about, where we can actually help to discuss evidence of climate change and what that means at a local level and a regional level. And it also allows us to understand where people's priorities are and how that can align to what needs to change in regards to mitigation and adaptation. Another organisation is Glasgow Wood, which again focuses on the circular economy and again teaching people how to reuse and repair and how that can be part of kind of mainstream culture without actually being seen through the lens of a charity enterprise. Food and Climate Action Project, so we host a member of staff from that project who supports the learning of food justice and try to support as well in growing food locally. And also there's a local pantry that they work with as well to support residents in the area, which helps build a lot of goodwill and also ultimately supports people. University of Glasgow, obviously I work at the University of Glasgow, mentioned that, but we also have internship programmes. So we had someone come in last year who was a data analyst, helped build as a data portal, which again, as I've mentioned, having that personal skill set would be something probably out of our means to hire. But the uni helped to pay for that intern, who built as a data portal that allows us to track and measure the work that we do. So we are able to demonstrate the good work that's done in our various projects. And again, that wouldn't be made possible without that partnership. And then we've got actually another network, effectively the Dumbarton Road Corridor local network. So that's a major road out there, a kind of artery road in Glasgow from the Clyde Tunnel out towards Clyde Bank. And we have managed to team up with 18 other organisations where we meet 3 or 4 times a year to discuss various issues and challenges. And we bring that sustainability angle to that group, really cementing that element of place-based practical climate action. And for us, it's that kind of work that actually helps to build confidence within the community to talk about climate and to ensure that people are at the centre of those initiatives. So, our next slide. And this actually then leads us to the more kind of regional and national discussions. And this is how we also help to grow through our peer networks. So not just in collaboration, but also co-learning. So sorry for the acronyms there, but that'd be the Glasgow Council for the Voluntary Sector and the North West Glasgow Voluntary Sector Network. So these are networks that allows us to build capacity. So whether that's in HR, finance, accounts, legal elements, working in various initiatives, we can share our learning and ultimately they share their learning with us. The Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, an organisation that we also contribute to from a grassroots point of view and also support grassroots actions. The Climate Action Network, again, more about peer learning. And just at the bottom there, iCycle Glasgow, so another strategic collaboration to support active travel and to support it's something that's kind of tangible in the area to allow people to, well, get about really, who are from various different income bands, hosting their annual get-together next month. And having those relationships, both at a regional and national level, help us test ideas, gain insight, and ultimately grow as an organisation and grow in confidence and knowledge, capacities and capabilities. And that kind of takes me into the final slide, I believe, which is, and relating to, I guess, the reason we're here today, and the title of the talk about falling in love with the future. So how do you actually do that? Well, first of all, a strong believer that we support small actions that help to shift culture. We focus on that shared purpose and not just a kind of individualism or individual projects, but we look to collaborate. And ultimately, we help to create spaces, physical and within our organisations for our people, our staff, our volunteers and our neighbours where they can learn together, collaborate and cooperate. And for us at the Eco Trust, that's actually what climate confidence looks like. It's how we help to move our organisation forward. It's how we help to move our community forward. So it gives people, I guess, hope going into the future, and it gives them courage as well to speak out in what can be some kind of challenging environments, because ultimately they know they are doing that together with peers in a community that the Trust helps brings together. And that brings me to the end of my talk. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that input. And again, really kind of cementing that the benefits and values of working collaboratively and collectively and continuing to have those like peer learning exchanges as well. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that we can go into a bit of question and answer. So yeah, I don't know if we've had any questions coming through the chat, but whilst we're kind of getting up to speed on that, I just had a couple of questions really just in reflection from hearing yourself, Emma, and kind of Chris speak. I guess both of you are from kind of, I suppose, more like environmentally focused organisations. And I guess there's probably people on the call that maybe wouldn't necessarily pitch that as their main priority. So have you got any kind of like hints or tips about how to maybe weave and navigate those in? I think there's definitely some actions that came through your discussions or insights today, but just if there was anything that kind of came to mind to build on that, I guess. Either of you want to jump in?
I'm being very, very kind of polite. Emma, do you want to go first, or shall I take the reins?
You go for it, Chris.
Yeah, so for me, I guess, and that's why I wanted to focus on those kind of individual, kind of small elements, is I think lots of people as you've demonstrated at the survey at the beginning, do care about the climate. And I think they see that sometimes as a big picture issue rather than a local issue. So for me, I then like to make that very localized element. So what does that look like to people in every day? So it's easier to actually talk about air pollution or water pollution, or how healthy our soils are, how safe our streets are in our urban environments, localized flooding. So you can end up talking about drainage systems, very exciting topics. But what does that then mean for people? So for us, it becomes really quite simple to discuss things like active travel, so being able to cycle short journeys, so you need safer streets, sustainable urban drainage systems. So some of the big streets in Glasgow, for instance, have been going through a bit of work, which has been taking a lot of flack actually in the media. But one of the biggest expenses about actually the drainage elements of that. Buying locally sourced food, the types of food as well. So talking about and normalising kind of plant-based diets, because again, we look at our sources of emissions and damage to our riverways and land. So there's lots of kind of different angles to discuss with people. And I think it's about really kind of playing it by ear almost and getting to know that individual before you engage with anything specific, because you really don't want to put people off. But most people do have that investment in their local environment and local infrastructure. So it's about understanding what they see as being pertinent to them.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, just trying to, I suppose, offer the organisations that opportunity to just like take the time to map out like what that looks like for their work. And I guess that maybe ties into some of the stuff that you mentioned, Emma. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it is about, as you both said there, about kind of making the connections as well and looking at this holistically. So I think sometimes we look at things in silos, and kind of climate change, environment has its own bubble, which is maybe different to some other community priorities or health or education. So I think it's about seeing the connections between them, and actually that exercise, you know, we're talking about Rob Hopkins and looking to the future. And I was lucky enough to go to one of his events in Paris a few weeks ago, and it was talking to the audience about what they see as what Paris could look like in the future. And it was, you know, more green spaces, it was more social spaces, you know, more equality, reducing inequality, things like that. And I think, you know, this kind of touches on a lot of what our organizations do. And I think when you look at it like that, in such a holistic way of the futures that we want to see, the communities and the places that we want to see in the future, so much of it relates to climate change without us even bringing climate change into the conversation. So I think it is about just making those connections. And also when we think about the impacts that climate change bring, making sure that the individuals, the communities, ourselves, the people that we work with aren't particularly exposed or vulnerable. So I think it is about, you know, keeping ourselves safe, making sure that we can achieve what it is that we set out to achieve, and looking at what we can put in place to try and do that. And I suppose just trying to break down these silos a little bit as well, and seeing the connections between these things.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Emma. And I think there's certainly, in terms of understanding those impacts, like the Adaptation Scotland site has some really good kind of resources, and we're going to be developing that bit of the Growing Climate Confidence site as well. Just if anyone's wondering, where do I start with this, then please do come and speak to us if this has kind of like piqued your interest, and we can link you up or signpost you to further support. I think in the chat there's someone noting that they used to do the full-on activism and chaining themselves to bulldozers against roads and things. Too old now, but understands the urgency. Perhaps not a question, but a note of confidence in terms of taking action. I don't know if anyone else has any kind of questions. I can't see any hands that are up. Tracy or Rhonda, just from your own kind of governance and information perspective, I don't know if there's anything you want to ask for the wider network who maybe couldn't join today.
I think just about that, it's such a big topic. You know, where would you start if, you know, you can't make the obvious connection, you're not an environmental charity, but, you know, trustees have got so much to think about: governance, charity law, regulation. So what would be one simple thing they could do to get them started? Is it the growing climate confidence? Would you recommend them doing, the questions there, or what would you suggest?
I'm happy to start with that one. Yeah,
Right, Emma.
yeah. I think the growing climate confidence tools are a really great start. And the Adaptation Scotland resources as well. I can link that in the chat. And yeah, I suppose my recommendation would be to kind of put this on the agenda, maybe have a separate meeting just to get people's views, because I've talked to organisations who have done that, and I've actually been quite surprised by the uptake and the interest of the people who were in the organisation who'd maybe been feeling this personally, but weren't quite sure how to take action or how to bring that into the space. So I think just kind of putting some time aside to have that open dialogue is a really good place to start, along with the resources that are available. And maybe also, I think collaborating with others right from the start can be really, really useful, even if, this is maybe the start of this journey for you. I think making those connections and having some support from others who have maybe gone through that journey is helpful too. So spaces like this, the organisations that we've mentioned, also happy to connect after if a further discussion would be useful. So yeah, I think learning from others as well is a good place to start.
Thanks, Emma. I don't know, Chris, if you've got anything else to add to that.
How do better people get started in climate confidence, you mean, or how do people make that first
Yeah,
move?
yeah, just any
Yeah.
initial tips.
Yeah, well, I guess it's about making it kind of personal. So for me, what are the kind of leading causes of climate? So you've got kind of land use, transport, are the two kind of big ones that people can make tangible differences. So for us, we run learn to cycle classes to give people the confidence to use a different mode of transport, so they're not car dependent. When it comes to, again, eating, so working with schools to help kids grow food and kind of connect them to the act of growing food, and also the kind of health benefits of eating locally sourced fruits and vegetables. So, and then again as well, we host quite a lot of kind of small forums in community groups, and things that come up is about kind of litter in their community and kind of so again, local cleanups and partnering with various organisations. So it allows us to I guess keep all these little touch points with people of all different generations, from gardening, growing, cycling, and ultimately that helps to kind of change hearts and minds a little bit to get them to think about the environment without making things overly complicated or complex.
Yeah, so that kind of making it personal, relatable aspect definitely kind of chimes in a lot with what Emma was saying around also just like creating that headspace to actually think about it or hold that time. Because you'd be surprised at what then comes out even through like crowdsourcing of ideas and opinions, right? It never ceases to amaze me what can come from that. And then one further thing just to offer, I mean, yeah, definitely check out the Growing Climate Confidence sites. But if you're into podcasts as well, I recently, just yesterday, listened to a really good one, which is the Charity Chat podcast. And they had Liz Gadd on talking about multi-solving. And I think for some organizations that perhaps the kind of climate and environment isn't necessarily like their prime driver, it's really talking about how we can solve multiple things through either kind of collaboration or also in tandem with one another. So that kind of provides another kind of different kind of tangible insight. So even if you were just to listen to that podcast, that's one kind of action that you could kind of take today as well. And we can follow up with the link to that with the slides as well. But I think if there's no further questions, we'll maybe just move to kind of close the session today. And as I mentioned at the beginning, thinking back to kind of honouring the title about falling in love with the future and doing some visioning. So Chris and Em have kindly said they'd be up for this, which is excellent. So I'm just going to kind of like pose the kind of question firstly to Emma, and then Chris, you can kind of give your thoughts as well. But really just, I suppose, like in the spirit of nurturing imaginative practice and kind of thinking about Rob Hopkins and the transition movement, who again will link those references to, so you can go and find out a bit more about. What does good look like for your organisation in place in 2050? And maybe thinking in that sort of multisensory approach, encompassing vision, kind of touch, smell, sound. What are your kind of imaginings for that? So Emma, do you mind kicking us off?
Oh, of course, yeah. I think when I thought about this, I thought from quite a personal perspective, and I quite like running. So I imagined what a run might look like in 2050. And I thought it would be much easier to run because there'd be much less cars and a lot more people walking, running, and cycling on the streets and pavements. And I thought it would feel cool because it'd be trees providing shade, um, and maybe easier to run because it'd be less paving, but maybe more grass or permeable surfaces to take up some excess rainwater. So I thought I would hear more birds, the buzz of insects and the smell of flowers and plants. And then I thought maybe I'd be able to work less and run more. And the reason I might be able to work less is because climate change is so embedded right across our policy areas and right in all the decision making that there's no job for me anymore. So we don't need to talk about climate adaptation, climate mitigation. It's just so fundamental to all the aspects of our life, which would give me time to go on many, many more runs. So that's my vision for 2050.
Absolutely love that. So good. And really nice that it brings it right back to like the personal thing. So when people are, maybe that is another kind of call to action, like what do you love doing? And then imagining what that could look like in 2050. So great. Chris, do you want to share your vision?
To be retired. Sorry. So for me, sorry to be facetious to kick off, but I think 2050 for me is almost too far away to imagine. So it's about looking at what we've got today in some places, and I think Emma, you mentioned Paris, and how you were there recently, and again when you look at the various cities, whether it's Paris or Seville, and what they are doing, where they are making more green spaces, they're making places more people-centered. The kind of the focus on our developments and feminist cities, ensuring that buildings, places, and spaces are built with children, older people, and women in mind, to ensure that folk can cycle more safely, walk, run, and play in areas that cities are not there, and areas are not there just simply for commerce and transport. So, and with that, I think it makes a more enjoyable, sustainable environment where we do and hear and smell the more natural environment, whether that's hearing birds in the morning or being able to smell different flowers and plants, and being able to actually eat locally produced fruits and vegetables, where we can discuss a sustainable food network, that people actually participate in growing their own food, and that we do actually have a level of trust within our local communities and local organisations, and that we're all pulling in the same direction with our neighbours. So yeah, for me, just like at the Eco Trust, that's kind of what we work towards. That the more good we do, the less we are needed to kind of keep shouting from the rooftops about climate change and environment, because it's just intrinsic within everybody to be community focused and focused on justice and sustainability, and it's that's seen as the default for everybody, that people and planet are interwoven.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And really nice that, really like that idea of all pulling in the same direction as our neighbours. I think that's a nice kind of point to kind of summarize today's session on as well. So thank you both for sharing those visions. And yeah, I think that pretty much brings us to a close. So we'd just like to firstly thank you to Emma and Chris for your inputs and your insights. They've been really inspiring, and I think people on the call will hopefully kind of take some of those actions kind of away, and also share the recording and hopefully inspire some more people as well. But in terms of, we've got some other upcoming events and training just in the sort of climate space. So we've got a kind of Take Action Carbon Reduction Planning workshop coming up in the 22nd of May, which is going to be an online session. And also a Connecting Communities Village Halls conference as well at the end of the month, which is hybrid, so Dunkeld, but also you can join in online. And there'll be space for talking about kind of climate action, but also a whole range of other exciting things too in relation to community spaces. And most importantly, on behalf of Tracy and Rhonda, the next trustee webinar is on the 4th of June, and that's going to be covering requirements for preparing charity accounts, changes to charity statement of recommended practice. So keep an eye out to book onto that as well. But yeah, I think without anything else to say, we'll close it there and really just thank you all for coming along today, and thank you again to our speakers and to Rhonda and Tracy for organising this trustees webinar. So yeah, thank you very much everyone who's coming along.
Thank you.